The faint sound rose like a broken thread of breath, muffled and hoarse, carrying from a discarded sack resting in the dust at the side of a scrub path. The man slowed. For a moment, the stillness around him returned. Cicadas pulsing in the thorn trees, the air heavy with dry heat. Then the bag shifted once, sharply, before falling silent again. He crouched quickly, loosening the rough knot with hands that moved carefully, as if afraid of what might be inside. When the sack opened, the truth of it trembled before him. A lion cub, no larger than a household dog, its ribs sharp under matted fur, one paw bound tightly with a thin nylon cord that had bitten deep into the swollen skin. The small body quivered in exhaustion, breaths catching in irregular shivers. He drew in a breath and let it go slowly, pulling his phone from his pocket to call the rangers. As he waited for their answer, he leaned closer, raising one hand to shield the cub from the afternoon wind. The animal's eyes barely opened, their dull golden surface clouded with fatigue. A faint cry escaped, not the bold roar of its kind, but a rasping plea that settled into the silence. "Easy, little one," the man whispered, the words carrying more steadiness than sound. He held them there like a promise, his presence alone a quiet shelter. Around them, the bushland seemed indifferent, but close to the ground the world was urgent and small. Flies circled, catching in the folds of the sack. The cub twitched weakly, tugging at the cord that cut into its paw, but the struggle had little force. Its flank rose and fell too quickly as though even breathing pressed its limits. The man placed his hand near its chest, not touching, simply allowing warmth to build in the still air between them. The trembling eased just slightly. Minutes stretched. The man's thoughts moved with care. He shifted his body to cast shade over the cub, crouched low so that his frame blocked the fierce edge of the sun. His knees sank into the coarse dirt, his palm braced against the earth as he held the sack open. Now and then he glanced down the path, waiting for the ranger's arrival, listening for the sound of their approach. Each small sound the cub made seemed to draw him back down, tiny whines, short gasps, as if the animal's fragile life might slip between moments. The nylon cord, tight and merciless, had left its mark. Skin beneath it swelled purple and raw, fur flattened under the pressure. The cub shifted its head once, pressing its muzzle briefly against the man's forearm, perhaps in confusion, perhaps in a search for comfort. The contact was brief, but it carried weight. He kept still, offering nothing more than his quiet nearness. The call of a distant bird floated across the scrub. The day continued on without pause, yet for the man the world narrowed to this trembling body in the dust. He adjusted the folds of the sack so it would not chafe further, arranging them in a loose circle that allowed air to pass while holding the cub steady. When a stronger gust of wind swept the track, he curved his shoulders low and closed the space around them, murmuring again, "Easy now." At last, the faint growl of an engine drifted closer along the path. Relief was quiet in him, but steady. The man stayed as he was, crouched beside the little lion, waiting. The cub's sides rose and fell, each breath shallow but stubborn. Its eyes closed fully now, the rasp of its calls softening into silence. Still, warmth pulsed faintly under its thin ribs, a fragile rhythm refusing to stop. The low hum of the approaching vehicle quieted the stillness, and soon the sound of boots on dirt broke the waiting silence. Rangers moved with quiet urgency, carrying a small kit marked with dust and long use. A field veterinarian crouched immediately beside the man, her eyes sweeping over the cub with the swift steadiness of someone who had seen life in its most fragile forms. She did not waste words. Her hands worked carefully, easing the cord away from the swollen paw. Each tug was measured, the blade of a small knife sliding under the nylon thread without grazing the raw skin beneath. The cub flinched faintly when the pressure eased, a tremor running through its thin body. Blood flow returned slowly, a dark flush swelling around the wound before settling into the pale fur. The paw looked delicate, out of place on a creature meant to grow into strength. The vet's hands were steady, rinsing the wound with clear solution, patting the fur dry with folded gauze. The man watched silently, his body bent forward, holding the loose folds of the sack back so the animal was free of its rough edges. A bottle appeared from the kit, clear liquid beating against the rim as the vet tilted it gently. She touched the dropper to the cub's gums, releasing only a trace at first. The animal stirred, swallowing in small spasms, throat working as the liquid trickled across its tongue. The sound of its rasping breaths softened, broken but steadier now, as if its lungs found a rhythm again. One of the rangers shifted, murmuring, "That's it, little one," under his breath, the words low and almost lost to the wind. The cub's head lifted slightly, heavy and uncertain, its eyes opening just enough to catch the light. For a moment it seemed to search, nose twitching as the scent of humans, earth, and antiseptic mingled in the air. A thin mule escaped, sharp but weak, a call that carried no distance but clung to the ears of those around it. The vet responded with another measured drop of liquid, and again the cub swallowed, its body trembling less with each swallow. As the sun lowered, the heat shifted quickly into chill. Shadows stretched long across the dust, and the evening air pressed cool fingers into the ground. The man reached for a cloth offered by one of the rangers, warming it against his own chest before folding it carefully and laying it close to the cub's ribs. The fabric carried stored heat, and the cub leaned subtly against it, as if instinct guided it toward the steady comfort. Its flank rose and fell, still shallow but less frantic, a rhythm that seemed almost fragile enough to break yet persistent enough to hope. The vet leaned back at last, her hands resting quietly on her knees. She gave a small nod, her work for now complete. Around them the land settled into evening. The dry brush whispered under the breath of night wind, and a bird gave a last call before silence fell. The cub shifted once more, pressing its muzzle against the edge of the cloth, eyes closing again in exhaustion. Its paw, freed from the cruel bite of cord, flexed faintly, claws retracting and spreading in a half-forgotten motion. The man remained where he was, one hand resting close but not on the animal, offering presence more than touch. His voice broke the stillness once, softer than before. "You're safe now." The words were not for the air, but for the moment, a fragment carried only to the ears of those who crouched close in the fading light. They did not move quickly to leave. They allowed the cub's body time to settle into its breathing, the rhythm now even, marked by occasional small calls no louder than the wind's murmur. The day's harshness softened into the onset of night, and in the circle of human care, a tiny heartbeat found warmth again. The air cooled quickly after dusk, carrying with it a stillness broken only by faint insect hums and the whisper of dry grass against itself. The cub lay nestled within the folded cloth, its breathing steadier now, though shallow. Its paw, no longer bound, twitched occasionally as sensation returned. Each movement was fragile but spoke of life refusing to fade. The rangers gathered in quiet agreement, their focus turning from survival to the delicate question of belonging. They rose and began scanning the edges of the path, eyes trained on the earth for signs that might connect this lone cub back to its pride. Pale dust bore faint impressions, pads pressed lightly, the arcs of claws left in soft soil, traces of movement weaving through the scrub. A ranger knelt, tracing the indentation of a larger print with his fingertip. The size and depth suggested a lioness moving not long before, her path drawn northward toward a low plain where acacia trees scattered like dark sentinels. The man stayed close to the cub, ensuring its warmth held steady. Now and then the small body shifted, head turning weakly, nostrils flaring as though it caught something carried on the wind. The breeze moved from the open plain, rich with musk and dust, a scent layered with the unmistakable note of lion. The vet exchanged a glance with the rangers, a silent recognition that they were close to where the pride might roam, to protect the cub from rejection. The rangers acted with quiet precision. One gathered handfuls of clean soil, sprinkling it lightly over the cub's fur, rubbing it gently to mask the sharp edge of human touch. The cub blinked slowly, its ears twitching faintly at the sensation but offering no resistance. Dust settled across its back, blending it back into the earth from which it had been taken. The ritual was slow, each movement careful, as though every gesture carried the weight of returning it to the wild. Around them, the bushland deepened into shadow. In the distance, a sound lifted across the plain, a low, throaty call, drawn out and resonant. It rolled through the evening like a question, fading into silence before another followed, farther away but of the same timbre. Contact calls, soft and searching, passed between unseen lions across the land. The cub stirred at the sound, a thin mule escaping, fragile but answering in its own way. Its head lifted, eyes narrowing against the fading light as it blinked toward the open stretch beyond. The man crouched beside it, his voice just above the hush of insects. "Just a little longer," he murmured, the words gentle, steadying both himself and the small life before him. He tucked the cloth closer around the cub's chest, the warmth now held firmly as the night grew colder. The animal leaned against it once more, breaths short but even, ears tilting to the distant voices of its kind. The rangers marked out a safe perimeter, keeping their presence low and movement minimal. They spoke rarely, and when they did, their words were hushed, as if not to disturb the fragile thread now tying this cub back to its pride. The wind shifted, carrying again the rich musk of lions, stronger this time, heavier with presence. The cub's nostrils flared, its small mouth parting as it gave another faint, urging cry. In that moment, the distance between human care and wild instinct seemed narrow. The cub's gaze lingered on the plain, ears tilted forward, body leaning as though some part of it already recognized the path back. Around it, the humans kept still, watchful but yielding, knowing the next step would not belong to them. The night deepened into a hush, broken only by the faint rustle of grass and the distant murmur of wild calls. The cub lay on its side, weak but restless, its head lifting now and again as if urged by something beyond sight. The humans remained still around it, their bodies low, breaths quiet, their presence shaped by patience. Every sound carried weight in the dark, and when the brush ahead parted, it was not the wind that moved it. A shape stepped forward, low and fluid, muscles rolling beneath a hide-made shadow by the dim light. The lioness emerged slowly, her body poised in power even at rest. Her head hung low, shoulders shifting with each deliberate step. A rumble grew in her chest, soft but layered with warning, carrying through the ground as much as the air. The team did not rise. They sank further into silence, kneeling in the dirt, their stillness offering space. The cub stirred as though pulled by recognition. A thin mule, sharp with urgency, broke from its throat. It was small, uncertain, yet carried the desperate tone of belonging. The lioness stopped, her body taut, ears flicked forward. She turned her muzzle toward the sound, nostrils flaring, the rumble fading into a low breath. For a long moment she stood as though considering, her eyes fixed on the trembling bundle lying in the dust. The cub tried again, the sound no louder but more insistent, a plea that cut across the short distance between them. The lioness lowered her head and took a step closer. The grass shifted at her flanks, the air dense with the scent of her presence. She paused just short of the cloth, scenting again, catching the mixture of dust, human trace, and the faint but true musk of her own kind. A final step closed the space. Her muzzle brushed the cub's cheek, rough fur grazing fragile skin. The cub responded instantly. A small, unsteady press of its paws against her foreleg, claws barely finding purchase in the thick coat. It nosed forward, leaning with all the strength it could summon, and the sound it gave this time was less of urgency and more of answer. The lioness responded with a lick, coarse and firm, dragging across the cub's head and neck, both rough and careful as though restoring it with the simple act of touch. The team remained motionless, their breaths slow, hearts held back in silence. None reached forward, none interrupted. Their role now was to witness, to ensure no barrier stood in the way of this reunion. The lioness drew the cub under her body, curling her frame protectively around it. Her head lowered again, eyes cutting briefly toward the humans, the silent warning still present, but her focus quickly returned to the fragile life pressed against her chest. The cub leaned heavily against her, its body small in contrast, but there was no mistaking the shift. It had found where it belonged, sheltered beneath the bulk of her frame, pressed close to the rhythm of her breathing. She nudged it again, a push that coaxed movement, and though unsteady, the cub shuffled closer, resting fully against the warmth of her belly. The sounds it made now were faint, mewls softened into the muffled space between fur and earth. Around them, the land seemed to hold its breath. The grass stood still, the calls in the distance quieted, as if the night itself had turned its gaze here. For the humans, it was a moment neither planned nor guaranteed, impossible in its delicacy, yet undeniable in its truth. They remained as they were, kneeling in the dust, watching the cub vanish into the safety of its mother's body. The cub, pressed against the lioness's body, found her with small, unsteady movements. Its mouth searched blindly until it latched, a faint rhythm of suckling breaking the silence. The lioness stood over it, watchful, her eyes never leaving the circle of humans kneeling nearby. Her tail twitched once, slow and deliberate, but her body did not pull away. She had accepted the fragile weight at her belly, and in that acceptance the world seemed to exhale. The men and women around her remained motionless, each gesture restrained to respect the boundary that had been crossed so delicately. The man who had first found the cub lowered his hand slowly until it rested against his knee, his breath steadying with quiet relief. In the dust nearby lay the nylon cord, coiled loosely now, its cruel imprint still fresh in the memory of the cub's swollen paw. One ranger picked it up carefully, slipping it into a pocket, a small act that carried more weight than its size suggested. The lioness licked once along the cub's back, her tongue leaving a rough line through the dusty fur. The cub shifted faintly but did not release its hold. When she bent again, her ears flicked forward, catching something in the grass beyond. A second shape emerged, moving with equal power but slower in approach. Another lioness stepped forward, head low, body framed by the tall grass as it bowed under her movement. The first lioness gave a soft chuff, a sound that bridged the space between them. The newcomer paused, then pressed her muzzle forward, brushing her face against the other in slow, deliberate greeting. Their contact lingered, whiskers sliding across whiskers, the sound of their breath shared in the cool night. Between them, the cub gave another small cry, muffled against its mother's body. The second lioness lowered her head to sniff, nostrils flaring as she acknowledged the tiny form tucked close. She did not intrude further but stood guard a short distance away, her presence steady, her eyes watching the humans with the same sharp caution. The rangers shifted slightly, marking in their minds the direction of the lion's path. One bent to press a stick into the soil, indicating where the poacher's trail would need to be followed in the days ahead. Another brushed the disturbed earth back over their own prints, leaving the ground as near to untouched as they could. Each action was measured, respectful of the moment, aware that their role here was ending. The lioness lifted her head and moved forward, urging the cub along with a gentle nudge. The small body stumbled, then pressed close to her leg, guided step by step into the shelter of grass. The second lioness turned, leading them into the shadows, her frame vanishing slowly into the swaying stalks. The cub's small cries faded into the distance, carried by the soft rhythm of its mother's stride. The man who had first heard its hoarse call allowed himself one final breath, slow and heavy. His hand, still curled from its long wait beside the cub, opened gently at his side. Around him, the rangers straightened, gathering only what they had brought, leaving the rest to the wild. No words were spoken, for none were needed. The pride melted into the dusk, their shapes dissolving into the tall grass until the land appeared untouched, holding only the echo of what had just passed. The wind carried through the plain, bending the grass in waves, whispering softly over the dust. The people turned away, walking back along the path in silence, each carrying the quiet weight of a return witnessed, a life restored. The plain grew still after the lions disappeared into the grass, but the presence they left behind seemed to linger in every detail. The ground still bore the shallow impressions of the cub's frail paws, close to the deeper marks of the lioness who had carried it away. Even as the wind worked to smooth the dust, those traces stood as quiet testimony that the fragile body which had trembled in human hands now walked again under the shelter of its kin. The rangers did not rise at once. They remained in place, listening to the faint rustle where the grass swayed back to silence. Only when the night's sounds returned, crickets humming, a nightjar calling from the distance, did they begin to move. Each motion was deliberate, as though the weight of their own presence might disrupt what had just been restored. The man who had first found the cub bent low to touch the earth where it had lain, fingers brushing lightly across the cool soil. The warmth of the little body was gone now, but the memory of its small breaths, its faint cries, lingered in his palm. He let the dust fall through his fingers, a gesture that seemed almost like giving it back to the land. His voice was barely more than breath when he whispered, "Back where you belong." One ranger unfolded a map under the dim beam of a shielded torch. He marked the area, circling where the lions had appeared, then traced the faint track leading toward the horizon where the poacher had left signs of passage. Tomorrow, with light on their side, they would follow it carefully, but tonight was left to the lions. Their work was not finished, but its most delicate part had passed. As they packed their small kit, the field veterinarian paused, looking once more into the tall grass. She had seen countless rescues, and differently, some with a body returned to silence instead of to life. The image of the lioness licking her cub, drawing it beneath her belly, etched itself into her memory as one of those rare moments where survival and belonging aligned. She closed the kit quietly, not breaking the stillness that seemed to rest over the place. The group began their walk back, boots pressing softly into the sand, each step careful. The moon lifted behind thin clouds, bathing the land in pale silver. Long shadows stretched across the track, brushing against thorn branches and scattered stones. The night carried a clarity that only comes in wild places, air cool and clean, every sound sharp enough to be felt as well as heard. At intervals, they stopped to listen. Once, far across the plain, the low rumble of lions reached their ears again. It was not a call of searching now, but one of reassurance, a deep note that rolled across the land like a promise. The cub's faint mewl was not heard, but all knew it was there, tucked against the steady rise and fall of its mother's body. The man who had carried the warmth of the cloth close to the cub walked slightly behind the others. He looked once over his shoulder, to the patch of dust where the sack had first stirred with that faint cry. Now it lay empty, carried away earlier by a ranger, but the memory of its cruel weight remained. The thought that life had been stolen and nearly lost pressed heavy against him, yet the sight of the cub returned eased it in equal measure. They moved on, their silence not heavy but reverent. Sometimes rescue meant the act of carrying, binding, healing. Tonight it meant stepping back, surrendering the outcome to the wilderness. It was a reminder that even the smallest gestures, untying a cord, holding a body against the cold, waiting without force, could open the way for something greater to unfold. When they reached the vehicle, the horizon had darkened fully, and only the stars marked the line between earth and sky. They loaded their packs, placing the small bundle of collected evidence carefully aside. Yet, even as they prepared to leave, no one hurried. The night felt like a page that could not be turned too quickly. From where they stood, the grass swayed in long waves, catching the starlight. The lions were already beyond sight, yet the team imagined them moving, the cub's small body stumbling at times but always pressed close to the warmth of its pride. That image would remain long after this night ended, carried home in silence, remembered in places where no one else would see. The man rested his hand against the side of the vehicle, leaning briefly, his eyes scanning the land one last time. His breath left him slowly, a final release of tension he had held since the moment the bag first stirred. He thought not of the fear or the cruelty, but of the small cry that had found its answer in the grass. The rangers climbed into their seats, and with one last glance toward the plain, they drove into the night. The sound of the engine faded quickly, leaving the land once more to its wild inhabitants. Wind whispered low across the scrub, bending stalks of grass, carrying the scent of lions deeper into the darkness. Somewhere out there, the cub slept against the steady heart of its mother, no longer a bundle of trembling ribs but a thread restored to the fabric of the pride. The night held it quietly, and the land, as it always had, absorbed both the cruelty and the miracle with the same patient silence. The humans carried the memory with them, not in words, but in the weight of their quiet steps, in the stillness of their breaths, in the simple knowledge that for one life, tonight, belonging had been returned.